Here we go, back again with another episode of the Around the Show Sports Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kyle Showalter, and I am joined tonight by my good pal, Christian Hausfeld. Christian, how we doing tonight, my man?
Doing great. Happy to be back. Temperatures are warming up, so we love to see it. Baseball's around the corner, so just a great time.
Yeah, we're missing Brandon tonight. Hopefully he'll be back next week. Obviously, some big life event for you last week. Good reason to miss. 5-year anniversary with your girlfriend, Darian. She's lovely. I love you both. If we're going to miss an episode, I'm glad it's for something like that.
Yeah.
Happy for the two of you and couldn't be more overjoyed to have both of you in my life. But we got to jump in to obviously the topic of sports, which is what we're here for. And we got to start in baseball. There's obviously been a lot of crazy stuff going on, but Carlos Correa has finally selected the team he's going to be playing for in the 2022 MLB season. He will be playing with the Minnesota Twins, who really nobody saw this one coming, so it's a little interesting. We're going to dive in. He got a 3-year, $35.1 million average annual value on the deal. I think that comes out to 93.3, if I do the math correctly. No, 105.3 is the math. Not the best in that regard, but we got to it. With opt-outs after each of the first 2 seasons and a limited no-trade clause in there as well. And I think there's a lot of interesting ways to look at this, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of go in on this for just a second. And then we'll kind of kick it back and conversate about it. But I think there's 4 really interesting ways that you can look at it through 4 different lenses you can check this deal out from. And the first of those I want to start with is from Carlos Correa's perspective. Now, he had a bit of a weird time coming in with the lockout looming. He had 2 other superstar middle infielders in Marcus Simeon and Corey Seeger. Corey Seeger, a World Series MVP. Marcus Simeon hit 40-plus home runs last season at the second base position. So obviously a lot of competition in his little position, his spot on the field that he resides. So that's going to drag down his market a little bit. And obviously the lockout was tough for a lot of players, but I think for somebody who was demanding that much money and didn't get it before the lockout, it was always going to be he was behind the 8 ball coming into it. And I think him and his agent, Scott Boras, did a really good job guaranteeing him this contract because next season, if all goes well, he's going to end up opting out and he's going to be a free agent again. And there's going to be no Corey Seagers. There's going to be no Marcus Semiens that are going to get in the way and muddy his market. So in terms of him, I think he did about the best that he could with the circumstances he was given. And I think him and his agent, Boras, did a really, really good job of getting what they needed to. From the Twins' perspective, I think this is an absolute win for them. And I think a lot of people kind of discount the Minnesota Twins as a small market team, but I've been to Minnesota. I did my undergraduate schooling in South Dakota, so I've been around a lot of Midwest people. And let me tell you, Minnesota, the Twins, they are a regional team. Everybody in South Dakota, everybody in North Dakota, everybody in Minnesota, they're all Twins fans. So they have a much bigger market than people give them credit for in terms of the guys that they're able to bring in, the money they're able to bring in for their players as well. And I think that this really shows the Twins fans like, hey, we're going for it. You know, they also made some really interesting moves with Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Josh Donaldson get shipped over to the Yankees and freeing up $50 million in room for their budget for Carlos Correa. Essentially, the Yankees are paying Carlos Correa's contract in a way with the money that they freed up with that Donaldson deal. And that's the other lens that I think it's interesting to look at. The New York Yankees, outside of the Garrett Cole signing, have not done anything spectacular in free agency in a really long time. And I think it's really telling of the direction that Cashman and Steinbrenner, the way that those guys are trying to run the team, that they're not in on this kind of a contract for Carlos Correa. Because I'll ask you really quick, if the Yankees offer him this contract and the Twins offer him this contract, which one do you think he's taking?
I know who I would take. I would take the Yankees.
Now, I think that 10 times out of 10, Correa would do the same thing. And it solves the issues with the Correa contract that could have came up, because I think the big thing for the Yankees is they didn't want to sign Carlos Correa to some, 12-year, $360 million contract or something like that. Obviously, random numbers there, but a big time, big money contract for a lot of years because they believe in the prospect capital that they have in the minor leagues. Guys like Anthony Volpe in the system at shortstop that they've really expressed that they have a high level of belief in. This deal wouldn't block Volpe. He would be able to opt out next year and 2 years from now because he has those 2 opt-outs in the contract, and he'd be able to just go on his merry way, and the Yankees could trot out Volpe for 162 as soon as Correa opts out. So from the Yankees' perspective, it's, if I'm a Yankees fan, the big reputation for them is that they spend.
Yeah,
Where is that? Yeah. They made the offer. Then they got Garrett Cole in the building. But what outside of that has Cashman done recently? And I think Yankees fans are really starting to come out in droves with this narrative that the Yankees really don't want to spend. And they're kind of operating like a smaller market club and letting the Minnesota Twins outbid them. It's kind of wild to think about. And then the last angle I want to look at, and I think the one that nobody's really talking about, but the one that makes me the most angry, is how come the Houston Astros weren't more invested in their player? Why weren't they
Yeah,
more
that-
driven to re-sign Carlos Correa? This is a guy you took number 1 overall in the draft. You developed him through your system. He won you a World Series. If you're not going to break the bank as ownership, Jim Crane and those guys in Houston, for this player who's given everything to the organization, brought you to the ultimate precipice of the sport, winning you a World Series, a homegrown player, why aren't we re-signing that guy and going and putting that effort in? And I pose that question to you because I think that's the most interesting angle to look at this from. Why weren't the Astros more motivated to re-sign a guy like Carlos Correa?
It's a very strange thing and a very interesting topic. I guess I kind of wanted to touch on the type of contract. So we've heard of recently, we've seen these long, extended contract years, the length of, I think it probably started with Bryce Harper with his huge 10 to 12 year contract. And then you start seeing these other teams like the White Sox, the Padres, where they have somebody like Tatis or Luis Robert, where they're starting to lock up these guys much younger for, again, like a decade. So you see those types of contracts where it's a long term and it's for a lot of money. But you also see, like, if the market isn't in your favor, okay, bet on myself and it's going to be a 1-year deal. I'm still going to get paid for what I'm worth, but I'll try again next offseason. And so that might have favored other teams that are more in go for it mode, but protects them long term. But this contract is kind of unique, and I don't know if I've seen anything like it before, where it is a short-term contract. It is a one and done. But let's say Correa absolutely wets the bed. He still has 3 years, and he basically has all the control at the end of the day. He has the no trade clause, which like you can get around, but he's getting paid like a top tier shortstop. But if he does go out there and perform again, he has just a normal Correa season like we've come to expect, and he's elite again. He has the opportunity to go out and seek a deal to go somewhere else. So yeah, it's very interesting because the Astros are that team that comes to mind where their window is open. Maybe it's starting to close because the team has been together and this window has been basically open since like 2017. But this type of contract would favor what they're looking for. They can go all in on one more year if they think they can go for it again. Or they could have maybe pushed to lock him up long term. Like you said, it's their homegrown kid. Heuston loves Correa. Maybe the rest of the nation doesn't, but like Texas is the one place where he's not hated. So yeah, it's just a real head scratcher at the end of the day.
Yeah, I have Correa's Fangraphs page pulled up. He slashed 279, 366, 485 last year. That's good for a 134 WRC plus. 5.8 WAR this last season on Fangraphs. He's a platinum glove winner in the past. He has 30 homer potential every single season. He's going to hit for high average, play good defense. He's going to get on base. This is a guy who you build a franchise around.
Yeah.
At the shortstop position, and the blueprint right now is getting those big, talented guys up the middle that can hit and play defense. Think of guys like Tatis. Think of guys like Lindor. Those are kind of the franchise cornerstones, the prototype for how you build your MLB organization right now. Is you get one of those guys up the middle in center field or shortstop, and you build your team around him. The Angels are another team. Obviously, they haven't had as much success, but getting that super talented hitter up the middle that can be serviceable enough on defense, it's a huge, huge weapon because speaking over the history of baseball, those have generally been very light hitting positions. Correa is a guy who does both well. I mean, you look at his career FWAR, 5.2, 5.1, 1.6, 3.1, 0.8 in 60 games, and then 5.8. And then you also have the 3.4, his rookie season that I just glossed over.
Just ludicrous numbers.
He's an incredible player, and you have the sign stealing stuff and the reputation. Obviously, all of that stuff precedes him, and that's all valid. And maybe some fan bases and some organizations kind of looked at the situation for what it was. This is a player who has a tainted legacy. He's not very well liked. Is this guy going to be somebody who, he's going to win his ball games, but is the fan base going to react negatively? I think at the end of the day, most fan bases would have gotten over it pretty quickly. But I mean, it's understandable to think maybe there was some pause there from some organizations. But a guy like Carlos Correa doesn't just grow on a tree. A guy who hits up the middle, plays good defense. If you draft this guy, develop him, he wins you a World Series, why are you not making that extra effort to make sure that he stays? Homegrown talent is one of the things that baseball fans love the most. We have these guys like Freddie Freeman who just led his team as well. After he won them a World Series, you could argue they should have been more motivated to bring him back. But he's 7 years older than Carlos Correa is, and he would have gotten a lot less money than Carlos Correa would have as well. I don't know. I'm just kind of... I'm happy for the Twins. I'm happy for Correa because the contract itself is such a win for the player. Boris did such a good job.
Beautifully
He
designed.
got himself a 1-year contract essentially to where he can go and reset the market next offseason, be the only big-time shortstop, big-name shortstop that's going to command a lot of money. And he has insurance in case, like you said, he has a bad season or he gets injured. He just opts back in, has another Carlos Correa season, go hit 275s, have 350 OBP, and slug 550. You're going to get a $300 million contract as a 28-year-old Carlos Correa. It's such a great deal for the player, and I'm happy for Twins fans and for the Twins organization for getting him. But it makes me pose a lot more questions for why the other organizations weren't pushing harder, more than I'm necessarily cheering the resiliency of Correa and Boris and being happy for those Twins fans. It really raises a lot of questions that I don't think there's easy answers for.
And before we move on, I'm glad you brought up the market kind of being flooded. This was an interesting offseason for baseball because, like you said, shortstop historically hasn't been a power hitting position. It's normally filled by an athletic guy. Maybe he's got a little bit of pop, but more you're looking for the athleticism.
Speedy glove first guy.
But this offseason was kind of filled with, it was kind of flooded. So this, again, the Yankees and Correa are kind of tied together where it's like the Yankees, if there was an offseason to go get a star, even if it's not Correa, this was the offseason to do it. You had Baez, which he's definitely a significant downgrade from Correa, but still, that's a bat I wouldn't mind having in the middle of the lineup if you could get him at a reduced price. You had Story, again, that's a step down. You had Simeon, which he can't play shortstop, but at least you can beef up that.
He can play shortstop, absolutely. He has in the past, but he's a second baseman going forward, obviously, in Texas. And
then, of course, Seeger. So it makes a ton of sense for Correa, where he's like, okay, like maybe this just is the wrong year to be a free agent. But the Yankees, they're tied together. The Yankees, why wouldn't you go grab one of those guys if you knew like you weren't all in on trying to get Correa? It's just very confusing.
Yeah, and I think we oftentimes as fans, and I think organizations are even more guilty of this than fans are, we kind of overvalue those prospects, and kind of the established big leaguer takes a back seat to what could develop in the minor leagues. Anthony Volpe could be an all-star caliber player when he comes up. Who knows how long that development takes when the Yankees have the organization that they have right now, that major league roster is ready to win. Who knows? It might take Anthony Volpe 3 years to get to an all-star level if he ever does. You sign Carlos Correa, you have a guy who's going to put up 4.5 to 5.5 F4 over the next couple of years, almost guaranteed unless he gets hurt, because he's done it every single year outside of the one down year back in 2018, the year after they won the World Series. And there was obviously a lot going on with the sign-stealing stuff at that time. It hadn't came out yet, but they alleged that they had stopped doing it at that point. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. It just feels bad when a homegrown player doesn't even get like a real offer from his home organization. They offered him 5 years, 160, I believe, which is $32 million per, no opt-outs, no trade, no trade clause, stuff like that. And then they never even got back to him, allegedly. They essentially left Carlos Correa and Boris on red going forward. It's just a tough pill to swallow for me as a baseball fan who likes to see these guys stay on the team. Obviously, as an Angels fan, they signed Trout to a lifetime contract. Hopefully, they never have to trade him. Hopefully, that same thing's coming for Shohei. I'm bummed Freddie left, but you look at these other organizations that have those guys that stay there forever, and they're legendary. Guys like Tony Gwynn with the Padres. Like, that could be the legacy that these guys build. And instead, the organization doesn't even give them the opportunity to realistically go and chase that. And it really does suck.
Yeah. One last thing before we move on. I promise this one last thing. It feels like the grass is always greener on the other side. And I'm glad you brought it up because it just clicked in my head. Like, the Yankees they have prospects, which is great. Who knows what they turn out to be? I mean, like, the prime example that comes to my head as being a Cubs fan is Albert Almora. Albert Almora was a top 3 prospect for us. He was an outfielder, but he had his window where he was trying to make it work for 3 or 4 years on the Cubs, and now he's trying to just get a backup role on another NL team, which I think he's on the Reds now. But the point is like, you have an established guy, you have a guy that he's one of the faces of baseball, unfortunately, with this cheating scandal, but like, he is that name brand guy, he is that difference maker, probably the best in the game at his position, if not top 3.
Certainly up.
And you have that opportunity to go get him, and then you end up not getting him, and then not getting anybody else, because I think there's just too much reservations with their farm.
Yeah, I mean, we always say, like, take what you have.
Yep.
You don't got to count on something being greener on the other side. Like, the grass ain't always greener. Sometimes that prospect isn't going to pan out, and you miss out on having a potential superstar on your team while you're waiting for this guy in the wings. And we got to talk about NFL free agency.
Shoo.
These last couple of weeks,
Nuts.
I've never seen an MLB offseason like this. I've never seen an NBA offseason like this. Certainly never seen an NFL offseason like this. And it feels like the NFL players have kind of taken what the NBA players have done over the last couple of years, where they really take full ownership of their careers and they're willing to move around and ruffle some feathers in order to get to the places that they want. And they've turned that up to 11 because this has been unbelievable. You brought something up to me, a tweet that you saw earlier in this week before we were starting the show, and you told me that 9 Pro Bowlers, or 9 players with a combined 39 Pro Bowls, have been traded over the last couple of weeks. Those are Russell Wilson.
16 days.
That's 16 days. So that's Russell Wilson to Denver, Carson Wentz to the Washington Commanders, which we say on this podcast for the first time. Khalil Mack to the Chargers, Amari Cooper to the Browns, Yannick Ngakoue to the Colts, Devontae Adams to the Raiders, DeShaun Watson to the Browns, and Matt Ryan to the Colts. And then just today, the news broke that Tyreek Hill has been traded to the Dolphins. And I just want to, for a quick second, hit on how nuts this free agency has been. It's been a ton of fun. Our group message for the show has been absolutely popping the last couple of days. And how could it not? If you're a sports fan, if you're an NFL fan, you have to absolutely love this. The fact that it's really becoming like an offseason of movement, where in the past, generally guys would just re-sign with the teams they were on. These guys wouldn't be forcing trades. How many franchise quarterbacks have been traded over the last 20 years? I'm assuming this year there's been more traded in these circumstances than in the last decade, at least.
It's just absolutely crazy. Fans always dream about it, where like you're going in the offseason, you have such high hopes, and you have guys on the edge of they need a contract extension, and then you just play the what if game. What if Devontae Adams was traded to the Bears? And it's like, I feel like you are the type of guy that always brings me back down to earth. And it's like, it's the NFL, it's not the NBA. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just, these things don't happen. And then this offseason has just been completely different than anything I've ever witnessed. It's just like, it's almost April, and we're still like, every day it almost seems like something new is happening. Like, even like after all the free agents, most of the big name free agents have gone, we have, again, more news. Tyreek Hill wants out, and he wants to get paid, and now he's joining the Miami. It's just
happened out of nowhere.
It can't, like, it just, the NFL just never sleeps. It just never sleeps.
Yeah, I think the narrative around the NBA for a couple of years, when LeBron was moving teams and Kawhi and Paul George were teaming up with the Clippers, there was almost a narrative in the NBA that the offseason was better than the regular season.
Yeah,
because it turned into a soap opera. And
the
NFL is kind of following that lead. This offseason has really felt like ESPN and those guys who dictate what the media follows and what they talk about. It almost feels like they're writing a script and NFL teams are just following it. It's like these are kids playing Madden. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. These teams are so willing to give up draft capital now, the exact opposite of what we were talking about with that Carlos Correa stuff, where you hold on to the prospects. For a long time, teams were very hesitant to trade away draft picks because they were worried about what the future of their organization will look like. I think as teams watched what the Rams have done over this last season, winning the Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford, going all in, trading away first-round picks for everyone, for Jalen Ramsey, Matthew Stafford, whoever else, traded for Odell last season, traded a second for Von Miller. Or excuse me, they actually signed Odell after he was cut, but they traded for Von Miller. I mean, there's a blueprint now.
Yeah.
There's a team who's done it and has been successful and won it. Now that they're paying Matthew Stafford, we'll see where they go from here. But it really feels like the NFL is taking after the NBA, and their offseason is going to become something explosive and fun to watch every year. Which, if that's the case, man, you think the NFL couldn't make more money than it already was? Get ready. Because if they're going to become a soap opera in the offseason, they're just going to keep printing even more money than they already have.
Kind of like we were talking about with baseball, with like, who knows what the prospects turn into, even if they're a top 10, top 5 in baseball. Who knows what they turn into? The Rams really kind of set that in motion in football, where it's like, we don't give a F. Just trade them away. Give me somebody that I know will win me games. Get me Stafford. Okay. Then we get Wilson. Okay. Then we have Watson get traded. They're going, and they don't care what the cost is, how many first rounders. Give me somebody that I know is going to win me games. And it's just, as a fan, it's awesome because we continually get to talk about the NFL. They just make trades where like it completely shakes up the league. Where like now the AFC, Oh my God. Like, I would just hate to be a
Yeah,
team that was like
seriously.
kind of middling in the middle, and your team in the AFC didn't get to make one of these moves where you guys are just significantly better, because the rest of the league, it's like so top heavy. Just the AFC is ridiculous. So it's crazy to me to kind of see this change in how teams operate nowadays, where it's like, go get the established guy. What's the probability? I don't know. There probably is a percentage, but what do you think the likelihood, even if you have a high draft pick in the first round, that guy turns out to be? There is a lot of risk in first round picks because they are worth a lot, and the guy could just end up not even being on your roster in 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think a perfect example of that is a guy like Jalen Reagor, who the Eagles took with the 22nd pick in the 2019 draft. I don't think he'll be on the roster come week 1, and they drafted him a pick ahead of Justin Jefferson. So, I mean, when that happened, I think a lot of people understood, hey, that probably wasn't the right pick, but it's happened with higher picks than that. You just completely whiff on these guys. Sometimes they just don't translate. They're NFL players playing against college kids, and a lot of the times it just doesn't shine through. Their talent just doesn't shine through in the NFL for whatever reason, whether it's a lack of athleticism, a lack of ability to comprehend the scheme, a lack of speed. There's a whole litany of things that can go into it. And for quarterbacks, it's a whole different can of worms. There's a reason that 50% of the quarterbacks that are drafted in the first round never end up panning out at all, let alone become a Pro Bowler, become an All-Pro, become an all-time great like a lot of these guys are expected to be when they're drafted. You think of a guy like Zach Wilson, what the expectations were for him last year. You know, if he ever turns out to be a capable starter, that should be considered a win, but that's just not the way that these things go. You know, you pick guys in the Baker Mayfield's another good example. He was an average starting quarterback before he got hurt last year, I would say. They took him number 1 overall, but the expectations are for him to turn out to be like a Tom Brady or a Peyton Manning or a Patrick Mahomes, one of those guys, and then he ends up being average, and then you're shit out of luck and just end up kicking the bucket down the road. And then you obviously make another move that's been a little bit interesting.
Yeah. Is that where you want to get into it right here?
I think now's probably a good time.
Okay.
So obviously what we're talking about is the massive blockbuster deal between the Cleveland Browns and the Houston Texans for quarterback DeShaun Watson. DeShaun Watson and his 6th-round pick go to the Cleveland Browns in exchange for 3 first-round picks, one over each of the next 3 seasons, and then a 4th-round selection this year, a 3rd-round selection the following year, and a 4th-round selection the year following that. A absolutely massive haul. He also got a 5-year, $238 million fully guaranteed contract, if I remember that correctly. If those are the exact numbers, if they aren't the exact numbers, excuse me. But big deal, big trade package. That number is fully guaranteed, which is the first of its kind in NFL history at that high of a dollar amount. An astonishing trade, I think, on a lot of different fronts. You can look at it from a ton of different perspectives. A quarterback of that magnitude at this stage of his career in terms of his age, I don't think has ever happened, at least in the modern NFL that I have been watching.
Yeah.
A quarterback with that high of a contract getting awarded to him obviously is crazy to think about. That many picks being sent in a deal. I don't know if we've seen that since the Herschel Walker trade way back when between the Cowboys and the Vikings. And then obviously the elephant in the room, the 22 sexual assault allegations that DeShaun Watson is still facing in civil court. He has been criminally acquitted for those. A grand jury refused to indict him, but he is still facing those 22 counts on the civil front. So there's obviously a lot of layers that we have to unpack here. I think we should start with the obvious one. Trading this much for a quarterback with the allegations that have been levied against him is obviously a risky move. There's still the threat of a suspension from Roger Goodell in the NFL. So Cleveland might be without the guy they just traded for and for an additional season. What's he going to look like after not playing football for 2 years? I don't think it'll have too big of an impact on him if that does be the case. I think he'll end up being fine from an on-field perspective. But there's obviously a lot to unpack. There's going to be a lot of stuff that comes out during the civil cases if it does come to that and it doesn't reach a settlement. And I think that's one of the NFL's and the Cleveland Browns' worst nightmares, is that a lot of the details from these allegations are going to come to light, and they're going to have to deal with the fact like, hey, we just traded away essentially the next 3 years of our draft for this guy. We got to roll with him essentially no matter what. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor a little bit. I know we obviously both have a little bit of thoughts on this front. It's tough to think about that he's kind of gotten this bachelor level. It's almost been a dating show, really.
It's been real weird. It's so the thing that I walk away with is the NFL cares about winning, and so do teams at the end of the day. And it's so obvious. Basically, any team with a heartbeat, even if you think you have the guy, I think probably outside of 10 teams probably looked into it, at least explored. which is it's just sad, kind of. It's just sad to think about. Yes, he's innocent criminally, but like you said, he still faces civil charges, which he probably will settle with outside of court. But it's just, I also heard, because the Browns released a statement that they did their due diligence. They went and looked through it all. But then the lawyer that's representing the 22 women, he said that they didn't ever reach out to them. So it's just like, how much did they really look into it? It feels like there was rumblings that he was going to be innocent before the verdict was even announced, because these teams were already doing their background homework and looking into the possibility and logistics of making this happen. So yeah, it's a very strange thing. You can go back to players like Kareem Hunt with domestic violence, and all of these things are very hard to swallow if I'm a fan of the team. Also, it just points to the teams, all they care about is winning, and it's going to take, maybe he gets suspended for half the season, maybe he gets suspended for the whole season. But as soon as he steps on the field and he wears that Browns jersey and he throws one touchdown pass, you'll be amazed how many people forget about this, and it'll be just brushed under the rug. And it's just really sad to think about. And then on top of that, he got this massive contract extension, paying him even more, which he already had a contract. They redid his contract with the Texans where he was kind of being paid already market value. So not only did they trade for him and they gave up a ton, but then it feels like they rewarded him too, where now he's the highest paid quarterback in the league. And it's like, it's just a bad look overall.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head there. The NFL doesn't have the most sterling reputation when it comes to violence against women in any capacity. You can think back, and I've talked about this already on the podcast, about the Ray Rice situation and how that really accelerated talks of this amongst NFL fans and how the NFL handles these issues. You can go back to the Ezekiel Elliott incident. You can talk about the Tyreek Hill incident that happened when he was in college, the Joe Mixon incident as well, the Kareem Hunt incident. I mean, you can name them. You can't count them on two hands, the amount of things that we've had in this. It's kind of a broad blanket term, but in violence against women, you can't count on two hands the amount of things that we've seen happen with NFL players over the last decade or so. And it really is sad. It's tough to be a fan of the sport and have to, stomach that these players are going out there making millions of dollars, and it's hard to think about it while it's going on, but every once in a while that thought pops into the back of your head and you're like, oh yeah, like this guy has this attached to him.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how much of that is going to be able to be sifted through with DeShaun Watson, because of how much more public this has been than all of that other stuff. And yeah, he's a great quarterback. The Browns are going to win a lot of games. They're probably going to be one of the favorites in the AFC, if not the favorite, honestly, with that roster and that quarterback. They could easily go on and win the Super Bowl next year. But it's going to be ugly for the NFL, and it's going to be ugly for the Cleveland Browns, and especially if a lot more details come out about all of this stuff. It could get really, really hairy for these guys, and it's going to be a black eye on the sport, a lot like these other instances have been in the 2010s when we were dealing with all the domestic violence issues.
And I just keep thinking about it too. It's just like when Kareem Hunt had to get suspended for domestic violence, and I think there was a video released of him kicking his girlfriend in the hallway. That was hard, but that was one girl. Ben Roethlisberger had domestic abuse with a girlfriend or his wife.
It was sexual assault allegations.
Okay, yeah.
Of a random woman, I believe.
22 is a lot. And if you want it, I know there'll be people out there that say like, oh, well, they're going to call into question the integrity of some of these women of the 22. But where there's smoke, there's fire. And there has to be at least, even if you want to completely boot out 50% of them, that's still 11 women that came forward with something, So if I was one of the 22 women, and there was even others that weren't even involved in the case, that didn't want to be a part of it, that they also came out with stories and they just wanted to share their stories and get the word out there that, hey, this guy is not a good guy. Where there's smoke, there's fire. I feel bad for the women, and it makes me feel sick inside, because some of these women are going to have to now watch this guy on TV. Not only watch this guy, but he's being paraded around for the talent. I mean, the talent is amazing, yes, but he's all that's been talked about basically for the past few days. And not only that, but he got a raise. He's the highest paid player in the league. it's just I can't imagine how they would feel. I mean, it completely throws out whatever they experienced and throws it away, and like it means nothing.
Yeah, I think the last thing that we'll say on this before we move on to Matt Ryan being traded to the Colts, and I think the main takeaway that we should all have from this situation is the lack of regret and the lack of attrition from DeShaun Watson and his lack of empathy towards these women. It's really jarring, and I think at the middle of this whole thing, there's one truth, and it's either that DeShaun Watson is a sexual predator and assaulted these 22 women and forced them to perform acts on him that they didn't want to, or he made these women feel horrifically uncomfortable. He was unfaithful to the woman that he was with. Either way, there should be some level of an apology coming from DeShaun Watson, whether it was A or B. He is a sexual predator, or he was just a guy who acted out of line and continued to do so, which, I mean, the line's really blended between those two things, because at the end of the day, these things happened. They were either consensual or unconsensual. So either way, DeShaun Watson acted out of line, and the fact that there's been no apology on any level from him, no sign that he has any regrets about anything that's occurred during this time, I think that's what we need to all take away when we're looking and trying to make the decision, well, do we damn a man who hasn't been proven innocent? I don't damn a man who hasn't been proven innocent, but I do damn a man who refuses to acknowledge that he made any kind of mistake. And I think that's where we are with DeShaun Watson, and I think that's the best spot to leave it for now. We'll come back and talk about the Browns on the field at another time, but I think it would be best if we moved on to Matt Ryan and the Colts at this point, because that's obviously another big trade that's went down just yesterday. And Matt Ryan going to the Colts, not a lot of trade compensation going back, only a single third-round pick. And this is a guy who could actually make some noise over in that AFC South the AFC North over there with Indianapolis.
Yeah, it's kind of related to the DeShaun Watson getting traded, because it's part of the fallout of all these teams exploring possibilities, and teams like the Browns with Baker, which we'll get into later, but also with Atlanta and Matt Ryan, where it's like, how committed are you to me? Where like they were in the final three, according to
two.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, if you include...
You're right. Cleveland was out, and then they were back in, so I guess you are right.
So, but it's part of the fallout where it's like, okay, we know the Panthers aren't committed to Sam Darnold, but Matt Ryan has been basically the face of their franchise for the past decade, right? So, yeah, it's just part of that DeShaun Watson fallout, and it's a really good deal for the Colts. They got to absorb some of that contract, which is going to be massive, but they get a difference maker and an upgrade over Carson Wentz as opposed to the previous year, and they only had to give up a third-round pick, where they're kind of dry on draft picks this year.
Yeah, I think Matt Ryan is going to the perfect situation for him. Matt Ryan knows how to hand the ball off to Jonathan Taylor. He knows how to make the reads that he needs to in the offense that they're going to be running up there. I think he's going to be a perfect fit with what Frank Reich likes to do. I think he's going to negate a lot of the mistakes that Carson Wentz made. Carson Wentz is obviously capable of making incredible plays. We've watched him do it throughout his whole career, and it's why I defended him for so damn long as the Eagles quarterback and why I was so optimistic for him going to Indianapolis. But I think he proved over the course of the season that he just makes too many mistakes to be considered a long-term answer at quarterback, at least at this time. Matt Ryan doesn't make those mistakes. Yeah, he's not going to make the super athletic play. He's not going to drop it down from the other arm slots and throw it around the field. But he's a guy who you know what you're getting. He's going to know the game plan. He's going to execute it. He's going to make the right reads. And on a team like Indianapolis, who has some really good young pieces on offense, their offensive line is very impressive. Jonathan Taylor is probably the best running back in the league outside of maybe Derrick Henry, who before he got hurt was leading the league in rushing. And then Michael Pittman Jr., a USC product that I absolutely love over in Indianapolis. He was a guy I was targeting in fantasy football very heavily last year. I had him in the league that we do together that you won for the second year in a row. So congrats to you for that. Just had to throw that in there. And then that defense is obviously very impressive in Indianapolis as well. They had 7 Pro Bowlers last year. I think Matt Ryan just lucked into a pretty incredible situation going from Atlanta, who wasn't anywhere close to competing anytime soon. And yeah, that's where his family is. That's where he's been his whole career. It's the place he loves. But now he's going to go get to spend the back 9 of his career, hopefully in an organization that's going to be able to better utilize his talents, because they're obviously in a much better position to compete going forward.
I think it's a win-win for both parties. Actually, there's 3 parties. There's Matt Ryan, there's the Colts, and Atlanta. Matt Ryan gets a win because he gets to go to a team that is trying to compete. They have a team that's already built to win. Like you said, strong offensive line, strong running game, and they have up-and-coming receivers. and a good defense. Matt Ryan is also in kind of towards the back end of his career, so the Colts get to have a guy that's established. They know what they're getting. It's a proven. What's the word I'm looking for? Proven commodity.
Sure.
There we go. So they're getting a proven commodity, and they didn't have to give up that much. So it seemed like when all these quarterback shoes were starting to drop, and they were missing out on some of these bigger name quarterbacks. It seemed like only a few days ago, like the only thing left was going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. And it's like, how much more of an upgrade is Jimmy compared to Carson Wentz? But they actually get a guy who is a difference maker. You know what you're getting, and you didn't have to give up that much, where like it's from what we've heard, the 49ers were wanting 2 second-round picks. And it really seemed like it was only the Colts that were bidding against themselves. And then Atlanta, if you look at it from their perspective, they A, lost out on DeShaun Watson, and then B, they lost out on their guy that they've been relying on for 10 years, and he's a good quarterback, a top 15 quarterback. And is it ironic that Ryan Pace went into their front office, and now they have quarterback dilemma where they don't have one anymore?
You had to sneak in a Ryan Pace shot, didn't you?
Yeah.
There's no getting around that with you. That's hilarious. I didn't even know Pace was over there in Atlanta right now.
He's like an assistant role or something.
Well, it makes sense then that they're gonna have Marcus Mariota there for the next 2 years. So I mean, Marcus Mariota, when he's gotten in the last couple of seasons, I mean, he's made a couple of plays, but I don't think he's going to be considered an answer long term. I think Atlanta's going to end up taking Malik with the 8th pick this year. I don't think they're going to end up going into next season without a quarterback. Whether that's a good pick or not, I think there's room for debate, but I do think they're going to be trying to find an answer at quarterback long term in this upcoming draft, whether that's Pickett, whether that's Malik, just one of those guys. But I do think it's very interesting from those 3 perspectives that you mentioned. I want to kick it over to the last thing we're going to talk about in this little segment, and that's the trade from today. We're recording this on Wednesday, March 23rd. That's the trade from Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins, which I woke up to with you and Brandon blowing up the group chat with that. Woke up with my eyes crusted over, looked at my phone and saw Tyreek Hill has been traded to the Dolphins when I had no clue that Tyreek Hill was having any kind of contract dispute. And apparently it devolved very quickly in Kansas City. Today, they realized they weren't going to come to terms on a contract extension. They gave him permission to seek a trade. A couple hours later, he's a Miami Dolphin pairing up with Jalen Waddle. And that leaves Kansas City in kind of a weird little predicament here with Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman, and Travis Kelce as their top receiving options. Now, obviously, a very big downgrade from having Tyreek Hill over there as well. And I'm not sure what the correct perspective to really talk about this is from, because I don't think this really moves the needle for the Dolphins. The Bills are going to win that division. I'm fully convinced pre-draft, so I take it with a grain of salt. The Bills are the best team in the NFL. They should be the favorites to win the Super Bowl next year, in my opinion, especially with the Chiefs getting weaker and their division getting much, much stronger. Who knows what their season is going to look like? I don't think this moves the needle for Miami too much. They still have Tua at quarterback, which is a huge question mark. If he takes a huge step, then we'll talk about that. But until then, I think Kansas City's the more interesting perspective to check this out from, and I'm curious to see if you'd agree with me on that.
Yeah, first thing I want to say is it's interesting. I feel like I blame Christian Kirk. I feel like he started all this, where he gets paid over $20 million, and then the actual top receivers are like, what the hell? And then Devontae Adams is like, okay, I want my money, and I'm not taking less. He gets traded. He gets the money he's looking for. And then Tyreek Hill is like, well, if he can do it, I mean, hold my beer. I want to get paid too. And so I just think it's really interesting. And I think we can all blame Christian Kirk for ruining Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill. From the Kansas City perspective, man, that sucks. That is a huge blow. He's just such a matchup nightmare, and he fits so well in that Kansas City system where you have Travis Kelce, matchup nightmare, and you have Tyreek Hill, matchup nightmare, both for their own unique reasons, where Tyreek Hill is just so fast and quick and agile, and then Travis Kelce is just big and athletic for his size. So now it makes me start to think ahead to, okay, well, the reason the Kansas City offense was working so well is because you couldn't key in on one guy. And if you keyed in on one guy, well, that opened up opportunities for the other guy. Now you don't really, yes, Juju he's an above average wide receiver, but not a Tyreek Hill. You can start keying in on Travis Kelce, who's now on 33. So how many more seasons does he have of that elite level, And you have to pay Patrick Mahomes. So is he a casualty of the Patrick Mahomes deal? And then if you look at it from the Miami perspective, One thing's for sure, and that's that the ownership and management running the front office believe in Tua. Like, they got him all the weapons he needs. They got him a rebuilt offensive line. They went and got a number one wide receiver in Tyreek Hill. If it doesn't work this season, it's fair to say it's on Tua. Before, like, he didn't have weapons. Okay, now he got Jalen Waddle. Okay, a little bit of improvement. Now he has a rebuilt offensive line. He has Tyreek Hill. You need to see results. Unfortunately, it's in the AFC. So the competition is just going to be insane. I don't know if this, like you said, moves the needle enough for the team, because personally, I don't know if Tua is that guy. But yeah, it's just very interesting.
I think the interesting angle from the Dolphins' perspective is they gave up a haul.
Mm-hmm.
They gave up just about as much you can possibly give up for a non-quarterback in any kind of trade. I think the Chiefs definitely maximized Tyreek Hill's trade value, especially when they didn't have a ton of leverage, being that they weren't going to give him a new contract, so they knew they had to trade him. They got an absolute haul for him. And I think if the Dolphins decide, and this is the last thing I'll talk about before I pop back over to the Kansas City side, if they decide Tua's not the guy next year, they don't really have an option. They don't have these first-round picks to go trade. You forget they also traded away their first-round pick this year to trade up in the draft last year and take the Eagles pick to get Jalen Waddle. So they're already behind in draft capital. They go out and they trade away even more for Tyreek Hill. So it really is Tua or bust over there in Miami. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of bad shit going on because they don't have the draft capital to bring in a guy like DeShaun Watson or a Russell Wilson or another one of these guys who might need to look to get traded over the next couple of years. You know, what are you doing to bring in? Their option might be going and getting a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Matt Ryan, you know, a mid-level starter that's going to move the needle a little bit. But then with that even, are they going to be able to overtake the Bills? The Patriots had a rookie quarterback last year. They still made the playoffs. Are they going to take another step forward with Mac Jones theoretically taking another step forward? I think it's a great trade because you're going to get Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill in the same offense.
Yeah.
Jalen Waddle's essentially Tyreek Hill light. A very explosive athlete, very similar skill set, not quite as fast, obviously, not quite as talented. But those two guys with Tyreek Hill mentoring Jalen Waddle, who knows what he can turn out to be. From that perspective, I love the deal. But from the perspective of the quarterback that you have in the room, it's hard for me to imagine that this is enough to really get them into legitimate contender status. Now, over on the Kansas City side, I think Tyreek Hill's loss cannot be overstated for what he brings to their offense. This is not just a burner receiver. No. This is a guy who runs a 4-3 in pads. This is a guy who runs crisp routes. He runs a complete route tree. He's not like a DeShaun Jackson who just burns down the field. He can run an out route. He can run a curl. He can run the drag, slant, go, post, corner, anything you want. Tyreek Hill is going to be able to run. He explodes on film. It is so obvious. He's a top 3 receiver in the NFL, and it's not just because he's the fastest dude. He's an absolute tank, too, if you've ever looked at Tyreek Hill. He is strong. He runs hard with the ball, and he's tough. The guy doesn't miss games. He's on the field all game long. He's an absolute guy, and losing him right now when the rest of the AFC is getting so much stronger, when the rest of the AFC West is looking like it's Goliath versus Goliath versus Goliath versus Goliath Light and the Raiders. Obviously not the same levels as other teams, but they can still play with just about anybody, getting Chandler Jones and adding him to their D-line this offseason. The Chiefs have objectively gotten worse, and I think this is the wrong time to be doing that. You go from an offense with Patrick Mahomes throwing the football to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and Juju Smith-Schuster. That's an offense that can attack every level of the field. And then they also have a guy named Mecole Hardman who burns down the field as well. But though with Tyreek Hill, you can attack downfield. With Travis Kelce, you can attack the boundaries in the middle of the field. And then Juju's a great slot guy who's really a good jack of all trades and can really pick weaknesses that those guys create in the defense. They went from that to just having Juju, who's not going to take the top off of the defense, and just having Travis Kelce, who's also not going to take the top off. And maybe Mecole Hardman can take a step forward, and maybe that's what they're counting on. But I'm not sold. He hasn't developed in the way that they expected when they made him a second-round pick a couple of years ago, and I just don't buy that he's going to suddenly become that guy that frees everything up for these other guys. It's a tough day to be a Chiefs fan, I think. And I messaged my buddy Casey, who's our resident Chiefs Connect. He writes for the fan-sided page for Kansas City. He's very dialed into everything going on over there, and he loves the trade because of the package, the collection of picks that they got back. But I think there's a little bit too much optimism in Chiefs land that this trade is going to work out for them, because I think we're underselling what Tyreek Hill is. He's not just a burner receiver. He is a true X number one wide receiver, you got to cover that guy or he's going to beat you by himself kind of a guy, like a Randy Moss or one of those guys, that caliber receiver where if you're not doubling him, you're messing up. And when you kind of double two guys on the offense, and Tyreek and Travis, that's what frees up all these other guys. Now they don't have to do that. I'm curious to see where the Chiefs go from here. And I think I think it wouldn't be unfair to say, and I've put this out on Twitter, that the Chargers should absolutely be the favorites in that division right now. I think that the Chiefs could fall down as far as third if everything in Denver works out as well. It's just really hard to imagine with the fact that they've taken a step back with everybody else taking such a monumental step forward that the Chiefs could end up not making the playoffs next year if things like this continue. And who knows? We could be in way overreaction mode right now. And Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
He's the best quarterback in the world. He's going to continue to be that, regardless of whether Tyreek is there or not. And maybe he makes up for it. But at the end of the day, we don't know that. And I think it's unfair to these other teams that have made the strides to kind of put Kansas City in front of them, at least at this moment.
It's also really interesting too. There's that window when you draft a quarterback and they're on their rookie deal and they're affordable. And the Chiefs had to pay Patrick Mahomes. Is he a casualty of the Patrick Mahomes deal? You can't commit $70 to $80 million on one side of the ball between two players. Is that where Kansas City had to draw the line? It's like, okay, we can't pay you what you're looking for. And that's where he had to get traded. On the other side of the coin, Dolphins, they have Tua, just like the Bears did when they went all in because they thought they had Mitch Trubisky and they went and got Khalil Mack. They're going chips all in and they're trying to maximize this window of a rookie deal with their quarterback. So to go get Tyreek Hill, yeah, you got no excuses left now, and it's very obvious that you're in go-for-it mode for them. Also, with the Chargers, like you mentioned, they should be like the undoubted number one, in my opinion, too. They got that defense squared away this offseason, and they still have their quarterback on a rookie deal as well and can afford to invest more and more money and capital on that side of the ball to get the weapons that he needs. So it's all around really interesting, and I don't know if you'll find a player like Tyreek Hill without those picks that they got back as high as they are for really what they gave up. Overall, I just feel like it's a lose for Kansas City.
Yeah, I'm hard pressed to find anything to disagree with you. I think it's absolutely a result of that Mahomes contract. And I think going forward, you live and die with the guy at quarterback. You had to pay him. Yep. You did. And this is just one of those things that happens as a result of that. We're not necessarily knocking the Chiefs for their decision because I think it's easily understandable why.
Right.
But this has certainly taken a huge hit on their outlook going forward, not just this year, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Tyreek Hill wasn't going anywhere in terms of his ability, at least from what we can tell. And it really feels like the Chiefs are taking a huge step back with this. And it really does suck as somebody who roots for the Chiefs, an Andy Reid-led team. I obviously love Andy. I have a ton of loyalty to him. When he won the Super Bowl, it was like I won the Super Bowl just again like the Eagles did the year before. But, man, it really does suck to see, a team that was so well put together starting to feel the effects of that quarterback's impact on the cap.
Yeah, and I just feel like it can't be understated. We'll never get to see a Patrick Mahomes to Tyreek Hill connection. That was electric. Every time they stepped on the field together, you knew as long as you had those two on the field that you guys had a shot at like an 80 to 75 yard touchdown at any given moment. He's just a matchup nightmare, and I think it's a sad day to think that we'll never get to see that connection again.
So we've talked a lot about the moves that have already happened, but there's still two moves that are looming, and I think everybody's kind of keeping an eye on these two, and that's what's going to happen with Jimmy Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield, the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers and still quarterback for the Cleveland Browns at the time of this recording. Neither of them have been traded. That could obviously change very quickly, as we learned today with the Tyreek Hill trade, how fast these things come together. But going forward, we got to talk about where these guys are going to end up. And I think Baker Mayfield's the more interesting of the two because I think there's a lot of interesting circumstances around him becoming an available commodity on the market. And you talked about it before the show that like Baker's kind of gotten screwed by this whole situation almost. And I'm inclined to agree with you. Exercising him into that fifth-year option puts a very large price tag on its head. So it's kind of hard for these clubs that are quarterback hungry, like the Seahawks and the Panthers are really the two big ones that stick out right now, to really give up a lot in these trade offers for them. Because why would you give up a lot of trade capital for a guy who last year didn't play well, was hurt, and has a big price against the cap coming this upcoming season. So even if he does play well, you're going to be converting a lot of money into him, and especially for a team like the Panthers, who have given up a lot of trade capital for quarterbacks over the last couple of years, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. So I'm curious to think where you think Baker's going to end up, because I don't think there's any clear answer truly outside of those two teams, and even those, they don't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. So we kind of mentioned it where the Colts, it seemed like we're too patient, and it's like, okay, all you got left is Jimmy. But now it seems like most teams who needed a quarterback have addressed the situation where it's like, okay, we've made plans, and this is who we're going with. Steelers got Trubisky, just to highlight one of the options that wasn't a big trade. But the teams who needed a quarterback kind of got their quarterback, and it's like, okay, we're now committed to the guy for the season. So I also thought it was just, we kind of talked about it earlier too, like the NFL is the best drama TV show ever, where it started coming out and started leaking out where Baker sent out this like goodbye to Cleveland note out of nowhere, and it's like, oh my God, is this related to DeShaun Watson? And so it was a goodbye to Cleveland, and then it comes out that DeShaun Watson kicked the Browns out of the final running, and it was between the Falcons and the Panthers apparently. And so Baker's like, "Oh yeah, well I'm still out of here. I want you guys to burn the bridge. I'm out of here. You guys can't have me." And it's like, okay. And then the Browns management's like, "Yeah, nice. Like we don't care. We're not trading you." When he officially requested a trade, the management's like, "Yeah, tough toodles. Like we have your contract rights. You're ours for the season. Play for us or don't. We don't care." And so it really seemed like Baker sensed like, oh, you're breaking up with me? Well, no, I'm breaking up with you. Or like you said earlier, it's like, oh, you have to start sensing that you're going to get fired. It's like, oh, well, I quit. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, just trying to beat him to the punch.
Just beat him to the punch. And then they end up getting DeShaun, and it's like, okay, now Baker just got screwed all over the place. And so now, like I mentioned earlier, it's just like, it's been a big game of musical chairs trying to get the quarterbacks all situated. There's not a whole lot of teams left, and the teams that, I mean, like Seahawks, maybe, Panthers, maybe, but Seahawks have Drew Lock, Panthers have Sam Darnold. Is Baker that much of an upgrade over those two guys? Maybe, but like he also has that high price tag that you talked about. So it's now teams are starting to say like they won't give up anything, and actually you'll have to send a pick back with you just for us to absorb his contract. So this offseason has just been a whirlwind of emotions, especially for poor Baker. But for us as the fans, like I just keep gobbling it up, because beyond just the sports implications, like the drama of Baker posting his own like breakup letter, and then them not being in the running, and they're like, no, we're keeping you. And then they actually do get DeShaun, and it's like, okay, yeah, you can leave your stuff at the door. Like, it's fine. Just crazy.
I think the cool thing as a sports fan, like you just mentioned, is that MLB and NFL free agency have been going on at the same time.
Oh my
and it's
God.
Literally from the moment we wake up in the morning to when we fall asleep, you and I are always talking about something that's going on. And it's been such a joy, because both these things, they're just huge news after huge news after huge news. And we just eat it up and get to talk about it all day. From the Baker perspective, I think the best thing that could possibly happen to him at this point is for him to just get cut, and he needs to go back somebody up. He needs to go to Tampa Bay and be Tom Brady's backup, or he needs to go to Denver and be Russell Wilson's backup. I think the biggest issue with Baker Mayfield isn't talent. I've said to you, even today, like Baker Mayfield can start in the NFL. He has the talent. He processes things well. He's accurate enough. I think a lot of the struggles last year were a result of the labrum issue. I think his problem is that he's not a grown-up. You know, when you're a quarterback, you have to understand your value. And I know why you're laughing, because Cleveland makes the comment they want a grown-up at quarterback, and they end up trading for DeShaun Watson, and that's a whole other can of worms, but we've already discussed that. I know exactly where you're going.
That's where I was going.
But the Browns do have a point. You know, when you are a quarterback in the NFL, and this goes for any walk of life, any job you have, you need to understand the value you bring to the table versus the headache that you bring to the management team. If you are an A-plus worker and all your work gets done on time in the office and you're clean and you interact well with everybody, you can afford to be a little bit of a shithead every once in a while. But if you're turning in C- work and you're messing around at your desk and you're turning in, if you're not doing your job correctly, you don't have the leeway to act like a jackass in the office. And the same thing stands in the NFL. If you're going to be a Patrick Mahomes level talent, you can do the no-look passes, and you can have the
State Farm commercials.
The State Farm commercials, exactly. If you're going to be this big, bombastic personality and be super expressive, you better back it up with on-field play, or it's going to get old real quick. And I think what happened in Cleveland is Baker's shit just got old real quick, just like that. And he bit off a little bit more than he can chew. I think the best thing that could possibly happen for him, and I hate to make statements about, maturity levels about grown men because I'm not in the building with them. I'm not in the room with them. Sure. I don't know this for a fact. But just the way that Baker's handled a lot of these situations, I think going to Tampa Bay and watching Tom Brady work and seeing how, Chris Godwin re-signs with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Odell Beckham Jr. gets himself released from the Browns to get away from Baker, and then as soon as they get another quarterback says he's willing to go back to Cleveland, there's a common denominator there. And it's one quarterback knows how to be a professional, knows how to interact with the guys in the locker room, knows how to keep everybody happy. That's Tom Brady that gets the guys to re-sign. And then there's the Baker Mayfields who's driving away the superstar player away from his own team. And I think going to one of these organizations with that established presence, the Russell Wilson, a Tom Brady, even an Aaron Rodgers, I think would do a lot of good for a guy like Baker who just needs to learn how to be a little bit more professional, because I still think to this day that he can be a quarterback in the NFL. I just think there's too much going on around him for it to be worth the risk at this point. I think that's why, if you get cut, you go sign for low money and go be a backup somewhere. I think it's the best thing that could possibly happen for him. You tell me Baker Mayfield goes and backs up Tom Brady for 17 games next year and learns under him that some team's not going to be calling for him next offseason, giving him a Jameis Winston type prove-it deal. I would if I was a fan of a team that needed a quarterback and that was the circumstances around Baker. But right now, why would I, if I'm the Seahawks, trade for him when I have Drew Lock, who just about as good of a chance that they're going to turn out good without any kind of maturing going on his second round draft picks contract versus Baker Mayfield's 5th-year option. That's just going to be an obnoxiously blown up number from whatever Drew Lock is making. It's just hard for me to motivate myself if I was a general manager to pursue that contract over what I already had in Drew Lock, especially just like I said, with all the question marks that surround Baker off the field.
Couple things on that. I remember Stephen A. always pointing to this about Baker Mayfield is he has more Hulu, or actually just commercial in general, that he's partnered with all these different companies. He has more commercials than he does actual wins. So that was always a thing with him. And I don't know because I'm not a teammate, but I know that would kind of, if I was a teammate, I feel like that would start to bug me after a while. I was like, okay, you are putting it out there that you're this big persona, you're this big one of the faces of the league with how many commercials you do, where I feel like he's a household face where most people are going to recognize him, but he doesn't really have the play to back it up. And it's like at some point that has to be annoying. I bet you for the ownership of the Browns, that has to be annoying too. But the other thing I wanted to mention is maybe, like you said, maybe the best option is for him to go back up somebody. Like, look at Mitch Trubisky. He has proven absolutely nothing. He went to the Bills. He didn't even start a game, and he got a starting job for the Steelers because he just was a good guy. He was a good guy in the locker room, and he's young. Baker's young. He can go to a situation where, like you said, maybe it's Tom Brady, where he just gets to be in the room with a leader, and maybe he gets to rebuild some of that that persona, not persona, but that what's the word I'm looking for? Some of the issues that he's lost in Cleveland with his character issues, he can go and rebuild that image. That's what I was looking for. Rebuild his image, maybe sitting behind an Aaron Rodgers or maybe a Tom Brady. And even you kind of got me thinking too, if Tom Brady has 2 years left, I mean, if he was released, I would be, if I was the Bucks, like go get him, have him sit for a couple of years, and then you have a young, maybe improved after a couple of years of game just to sit and watch. You have a young guy to fill that role. So maybe that is the perfect situation for him.
Yeah, and at the very least, you get a capable backup quarterback who started in the NFL and has experience throwing against these guys. I think the other guy that we're going to talk about right now, Jimmy Garoppolo, has none of these off the field issues attached to him outside of one frivolous night with a lady that got him the nickname Porn Star Jimmy, which is probably the greatest nickname in the history of sports.
Yeah.
But Jimmy Garoppolo's in another really odd situation, not really of his own doing so much as Baker's is. His team just traded 3 first-round picks to draft his replacement while he was still on the roster, which can't feel good.
No.
But Jimmy Garoppolo is another guy who's interesting, and I think there's really only one team that you could think is going to be trading for Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's the Panthers, because the Niners aren't going to trade him to the Seahawks in the division. They're not going to want to play him twice a year, even if they're not afraid of him. That's just not something that organizations do. So there's really not a lot of places that Jimmy can end up, and you keep bringing it up to me like, what if Jimmy ends up being a Niner next year? And I've said the whole offseason, there's no way. There's no way that they bring him back with Trey Lance in the building as the no-doubt starter, because every single time Trey Lance throws an interception, every single time Trey Lance fumbles the ball, every single time Trey Lance makes the wrong read and throws the ball to a receiver's feet or something like that, he's going to be looking to the sideline to see if Jimmy Garoppolo is trotting into the game. Because that's what Jimmy Garoppolo has been doing with Trey Lance over the last couple of years, and that's what Carson Wentz was doing with Jalen Hurts the year before he got traded. Every single one of these situations, that's just how it works, and that's why you can't have 2 starting caliber quarterbacks on any roster. I mean, you can even go back with the Carson Wentz thing and talk about him with Nick Foles. That pretty much undid Carson's entire career. You know, the psychological impact that has. It's kind of hard to argue that didn't play at least somewhat of an effect in his downfall with the Birds. And you don't want to do that to your rookie quarterback. You know, you trade away 3 first-round picks for this guy. You have a Super Bowl-ready roster. You have no choice but for Trey Lance to work out. You have to cut the umbilical cord and get Jimmy out of there. Otherwise, Trey Lance will never 100% feel like it's his team. But the longer we go without him being traded and the more places dry up for his possible landing spot, I don't know what else they're going to do. Is Carolina going to trade for him? Is Atlanta? Atlanta makes sense too. I mean, they just signed Marcus Mariota, but he's been backing up for a couple of years. There's nothing saying that they won't trade another pick and get Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm curious to see what you think about that, because I'm kind of at a loss right now. I don't know where he could possibly end up, but it can't be San Francisco. It just can't.
Yeah, it was so weird because it almost felt like the deal was already done. It felt like he was going to the Colts. Like that was the spot, and it felt like it made the most sense. An NFC team trading to an AFC team. It's going to a team that's ready to compete, which they were trying to work with Jimmy and get him to a place where he can win games, where it's not just a terrible franchise and it's a terrible situation for him. It's the least they can do for him. But it also felt like maybe the San Francisco management kind of just effed the situation up, where it is a big game of musical chairs, and it feels like the music has stopped and there's no chairs left. And apparently they were asking for 2 2s, which is a pretty steep price. And then the Colts just happened to have Matt Ryan just get pissed off with all this DeShaun Watson stuff. And so he fell into their lap, and they had to pay only a 3rd-round pick. So it's just a question that I was going to pose to you while we're on the show is like, what are the odds that Baker and Jimmy both do not have starting jobs next year?
As of right now, it feels like the odds are a lot higher than they would have been
insane.
A month ago. Yeah,
It's
I mean,
insane.
they're 2 guys who are good enough to start in the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, Baker, when he's healthy, he's a top 32 player at his position in the league. And Jimmy Garoppolo, talent's never been the issue.
No.
Productivity's never been the issue. He just can't stay healthy.
Yeah.
And granted, he's had a couple stretches of not stellar play. You think back to the Super Bowl when they faced the Chiefs. He missed an opportunity to hit a deep ball to Marquise Goodwin that would have won the Super Bowl for him, and he overthrew him. But, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo is a good quarterback.
He had a good season.
I had a whole segment on one of the first editions of the podcast when it was just me and it was just audio about how Jimmy Garoppolo is like the pinnacle of average quarterback production. When he's on the field, he is an average NFL quarterback. And granted, that's not going to win you a Super Bowl the majority of the time.
It's
but if
serviceable.
you have a good enough roster, if he gets hot, you can go win the whole thing. It's going to make your team that's bad respectable. It's hard to imagine that a guy that can play as well as Jimmy Garoppolo, more so than Baker, because I think there's a lot more question marks with him. Jimmy should be starting in the NFL next year, regardless of what you think about his ability. The only question mark really with him is always going to be his health. he's good enough to play. And the fact that he might be a backup in San Francisco is just really, really wild to think about. But I don't know, looking around the league, outside of Atlanta, who has Marcus Mariota, and outside of Carolina, who's probably still looking to take a bigger swing than Jimmy Garoppolo, because Matt Rule is not in a good spot to keep his job if he struggles this year. I don't know, man. I really don't.
Yeah, and going off what you said, he played well. Like, if the season, if you just
championship game.
He was in the playoffs and playing well. Like, the game against the Packers, I felt like you could make a case that he played better than Aaron Rodgers. His value couldn't have been higher. It just feels like the management for the San Francisco 49ers it felt like they were bluffing for too long of how good Jimmy actually is. And then it just happened. They just happened to luck into Matt Ryan. It really feels like the music has stopped, and it's like Baker and Jimmy both, like, I just don't know where they would go and who would be willing to pay the price to get them, both financially or trade wise.
Yeah, I think they're both going to end up either, like what you said with Baker, they might have to attach a pick to him to get his number off the books because teams just aren't going to want to take that money on. They're going to end up having to give Jimmy Garoppolo away, whether that's cutting him, whether that's taking a really low pick for him, like a 4th or a 5th round pick. And that's a low pick for a quarterback of this caliber. They're definitely not going to get 2 twos for him. I can't see. Nobody's bidding against anybody.
Nope.
The only teams we can think of.
It was the Colts bidding against the Colts,
exactly.
And now the Colts are out. So
it really feels like Carolina, or he's going to end up being a backup in San Francisco again, which neither of those options really feel great if you're Jimmy Garoppolo. You're either sitting there and you got to deal with, being the thorn in Trey Lance's heel, who I'm sure those are 2 guys with a good relationship, and I'm sure neither of them want that. I'm sure Jimmy Garoppolo wants to leave San Francisco. I'm sure he doesn't feel like he's being properly respected there. Or you go to Carolina, where there are rumors that Christian McCaffrey might get traded. Matt Rule hasn't had any success in the NFL. And imagine a Christian McCaffrey trade on top of all of this. We might as well get back in the studio tomorrow and have another show if that happens.
With our luck, it will happen tonight, right after.
Yeah, we've been having some tough luck in terms of when we record and when news breaks, that's for sure. But the DeShaun Watson, the Carlos Correa, Freddie Freeman, all of that stuff seemed to happen right when we've gotten off the air. The Devontae Adams trade happened the day after we recorded as well. But wrapping up the discussion on Jimmy, it just really feels like you said they held their cards too close to their chest, and everybody called their bluff, and now they're sitting there with no real options other than
no value.
Just fold and give in. Because at the end of the day, if you overplay your hand, you end up getting burned. And that really feels like what's happening over in San Francisco right now.
One more thing too is, like, a couple weeks, it might have been 2 weeks ago, when Kyler Murray posted that weird. Well, it wasn't Kyler. I think it was his agent that posted that weird, oh, I'm Kyler and I want to win, and then that's all I care about. But I need them to commit to me long term. And all of us are kind of like, what the? It's like, you still have 2 years left, technically, with the 5th year option. But with the whole Baker thing, oh my God, does it make sense? Because Baker after his 3rd year, if you put Baker and Kyler together, Kyler's going into his 4th year. Baker, after his 3rd year, he won them a playoff game, and there was nobody in the world thought we would be where we're at today after the 4th year. His play in the 4th year really determined he just got screwed out of hundreds of millions, possibly with a contract extension. That's why people like Josh Allen, they're set. It doesn't matter how they play. It's why Kyler and his agent are pushing so hard. Anything can happen in that 4th season.
Yep.
Kyler can absolutely just crap the bed, and then now they have to play on a 5th year option, and it's that's not what anybody wants. Baker is the prime example of why, and it just makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it always felt like it was going to go one more year and Baker was going to get tagged, and obviously the DeShaun Watson situation and trade really moved all of that timeline up quite a bit, and now Baker's clearly not going to be in Cleveland next year. Jimmy's most likely not going to be in San Francisco, but in terms of where they're going to end up, I don't think any of us have any real idea outside of the big obvious ones, which are Seattle and Carolina. But we will keep a close eye on it, as with the entertaining saga and cycle is going to continue with the NFL and MLB seasons. The NBA is obviously in full swing, and hopefully over the next couple of weeks we get to talk about that more, and the NFL will stop hogging all of our airtime. But next week we got something super excited for you guys. I'm super ready and super thrilled for you guys to see what we've been cooking up. But as for tonight, that is all we got for you. As we always say, we appreciate you letting us into our homes, letting us into your ears, listening to us, and we will catch you guys next week.